Hi, I am Verdaillia Turner, and this is Let's Talk. Today is October 31st, 2022, one day and 1 week before the elections in the great state of Georgia. Today, we are bringing you separate interviews of state school superintendent candidates, Richard Wood, incumbent Republican, and Alisha Thomas Searcy, Democrat challenger. Neither candidate could hear the interview or the answers for the other candidate. So once you have taken your time and listened, we hope and pray and trust that you share these interviews with everyone possible, and please subscribe. We hope that we've been of service to you. Thank you. Hi, I am Verdaillia Turner, and this is Let's Talk. Today we are blessed to have Representative Alisha Searcy, one of the candidates for state school superintendent. We're going right into the questions, and we're so glad to have her here today.
Thank you.
Representative, last Monday, October the 24th, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution headline read, "Georgia scores stable on national report card per the NAEP scores." Elaborate on that. What does that mean to you?
I think, first of all, thank you for having me. You started with the right question. I think that headline is quite troubling and misleading. There's nothing stable about our NAEP scores in Georgia. As you and your listeners know, this is the national report card that compares how our students are doing in Georgia to all of the students in the country. And I think the most troubling for me is that only 26% of our 8th graders are proficient in math, and only 32% of our 4th graders are proficient in reading. There's nothing stable about that, other than the fact that that's been consistent for the last several years. Even pre-COVID, those were very similar numbers. In fact, we've gone down. And so I am deeply concerned. I'm also concerned that our current state school superintendent was quoted as saying he was pleased and encouraged by those numbers. Again, as a parent of 3 school-age children, I think 26% and 32% are anything but pleasing or encouraging. In fact, it's the opposite. And so I think we are in a crisis when it comes to students learning in our state, and it's not their fault. It is, I think, due to a lack of leadership and a lack of vision in terms of what we want to see in public education, what we want for our children, and it's time for change.
All right, thank you. If you are elected, you will be representing approximately 1.7 million public school students and about 181 school systems, excluding your home county and metropolitan counties such as Fulton, Gwinnett, and DeKalb. Name for Georgia a school system that you think is doing a great job that does not have the name of academy in it or charter, and tell us why you think it's a great school district.
I like that question. I'll name a few, and for different reasons. Pike County is the one that comes to mind first. I've not met their superintendent yet, but I've heard great things. Talking to some of the teachers there, they really like the way the superintendent celebrates teachers, rewards them for excellent work, not pressuring them around test scores and other things, and they just feel supported as educators. And there are a lot of things that I hear happening from an innovative standpoint in terms of thinking outside the box and really driving teaching and learning. Warren County is another that I would name. When I was a consultant, I am a consultant now, but when I worked with them as a consultant, I was very impressed with, although a very small school district with a very small staff, I was just blown away by the level of commitment of the educators and the administrators, particularly at the central office level. Part of my work was rewriting all of the job descriptions for the district. And in interviewing all of them and spending time in the district, my heart was just so, I was overwhelmed really with just the level of commitment and dedication that the staff had. Just things like the special ed director and I know you worked in large systems, but the special ed director on Saturdays would be the person going to pick up kids to do their evaluations. And so the kind of team that they do what it takes to meet the needs of the children. And I don't think everybody should do that, but I think it represents what's possible when you have caring adults in front of children who have high expectations, who want to make sure that they have their needs met. So those are two that I would name. There are probably several more, but I think generally speaking, when I consider the districts outside of Metro, as you said, not considering Cobb, which is where I live, the districts that Putnam County is another. Their superintendent is phenomenal, always thinking outside the box. They're one of the districts looking at how we rethink testing, and they're a part of the pilot. And so I appreciate superintendents like that who are really willing to push the envelope, think differently, be open to new ideas, but also have staff who are really, really committed to children.
Are there any particular schools, high schools, middle schools, or elementary schools you would like to point out for us?
Ooh, within those same counties?
Anywhere.
One school in Fulton County.
Oh,
you said I can't think of. Let me think. There is, you said it can't be a charter either, or a charter district.
Not charter or not an academy.
Because I was thinking of Dalton and the great work that they're doing in Whitfield County. I'll have to keep thinking about that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's a good answer, though. The one that you gave us a lot of districts. Thank you so much. I'm sure those superintendents and the teachers would appreciate that.
Absolutely.
If you are elected, you will inherit an appointed state board of education. Explain to the public the pros and cons of having an appointed board, and where can you be innovative outside of the board?
Interesting question. So I'm assuming that people know, but the State Board of Education is, of course, appointed by the governor, 14 members by congressional district. And what we know is that when it comes to education, at least what I know from my track record in the legislature, I spent 12 years in the Georgia House, I think we have to work with everybody when it comes to doing what's best for children. And so I think the pros of that is if you are there for children, regardless of your party affiliation or where you live in the state or who you are appointed by, you will do what is in the best interest of children. And where I have been successful in working with people across the aisle, working with people who live in different parts of Georgia that I may not be familiar with, is building relationships and finding that common ground and determining where are those ways that we can work together. What are those things that when we talk about values, when we talk about our ultimate goal for children, how can we come together and determine, what are the most effective ways to do that? And so I'm very proud of my record as a state legislator being able to do that. I am a Democrat. We were in a Republican-controlled legislature, and I'm one of the few Democrats who's passed bills, passed a constitutional amendment, and the way you do that, again, is working across the aisle. I think the con is when you are appointed, the accountability is different than when you are elected by a group of people or by the electorate. And so maybe the politics are different. And so I look forward to learning the difference in that politics between working with the legislature and working with an appointed board. But certainly as a former superintendent, I had to work with a board. And so I, again, understand the importance of relationships, getting to know what people want and need, and as the leader, ensuring that there's a shared vision, that everybody's clear on what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and we have a clear plan on how we get there.
Tell Georgia the schools that you were superintendent over, where was that located, how many schools and students and et cetera, and how is that district faring now?
Sure. So I was the superintendent of Ivy Preparatory Academies. At the time that I became superintendent, we had 3 schools, 1 elementary, 2 middle schools. When I got to Ivy Prep, the elementary school had a 43 CCRPI score. One of the middle schools had a 65. Teacher retention rate was 25%. And when my team and I got in there, we got that 43 to an 85, 65 to an 81, and got that teacher retention rate from a 25 to 75%. And at the end of my tenure, proud to say that, and these are public charter schools, so the difference between a public charter and a traditional school is that a charter means a contract. And so if we did not outperform the district that we were in, you can't get the charter renewed. And so I'm proud to say that at the end of my tenure, I got renewals for all 3 of those schools.
Are those 3 schools still in existence?
2 of them are.
Okay.
The third one, even though we got the renewal after I left, the board at the time decided to return the charter. And that, of course, had nothing to do with me. But when I was superintendent and got those renewals, all of them were renewed. All of those schools were turned around. The state and federal programs, when I got there, were all out of compliance. When I left, all of them were back into compliance. I'm very proud of that work. And I'll just mention, too, because I don't know, what people know, but charter schools are public schools in Georgia, right? And so the same responsibilities that the Atlanta Public Schools superintendent or DeKalb superintendent had were the same responsibilities that I had in terms of accountability by the Department of Education, accountability by the U.S. Department of Education, making sure that our special education students got the resources that they needed. Charter schools are not able to cream, or I think some people say, pick the best of the best. Charter schools aren't able to do that. And so as long as the child is in the grade span that you serve and they live in the district, the spot is open for them. The only way you can find out about their grades or their IEP or any of that is once they're already enrolled in the school. And so it's one of the experiences that I think is most important now that I'm running for state school superintendent, because I know the experience of superintendents across this state. It's one thing for me to know it as a state legislator and know how the state budget works. It's another thing as a superintendent to be sitting at the table working through allotment sheets and figuring out from the State Department of Education how our schools are going to be funded, how do I make sure that our students have school counselors or assistant principals. So it was an absolute critical experience for me to have, and it's one of the reasons that helped me to know that I am prepared and absolutely qualified to be the next state school superintendent.
Okay, on down further, I have some questions about charter schools. Thank you so much. Approximately 25% of Georgia teachers out of about 120,000 have 21 plus years of service in. Some may be entitled to Social Security because they had other jobs, or they were moonlighting, or they have spouses, etc. 15 states, including Georgia, and all of them aren't in the South either, are under what we call the windfall elimination provision. And that means when you get ready to retire, there's a formula. And you may not get all of the Social Security that you paid into. Right now, there's House Resolution, I think it's 82 before Congress, to try to eliminate that. Tell Georgia and teachers especially your thoughts on what some folk call double dipping.
I don't think that's double dipping. I think these are 2 different systems. One is federal, one is state. If you have paid into the system, then you deserve to have your money, regardless of the system that it's in. I have paid into the teacher retirement system. I want all of my money. I have paid into Social Security and other jobs. I want all of my money. And so I think it's important public policy, particularly when it comes to educators. We provide a service, and we are owed the money that we have paid in plus some, if you ask me.
Good, thank you. Are there any charter schools in Georgia run by private companies? And if so, why are those private companies necessary over local boards of education's running those charter schools?
No. So in Georgia, all charter schools are public schools. They're all 501c3s. So it would be illegal for a private company to run a charter school.
They can't be the administrator with a contract or anything?
You can have, let's say, let me think of an example. So Atlanta Public Schools is a charter district, as you know. So all of the schools in Atlanta Public Schools are charters. So if Atlanta, they have contracted with purpose-built schools, right? They are a nonprofit organization. So they may contract with them to come in and run a school. So that happens all the time in education, right? Where a school district may contract with a private company to provide testing resources. Or if you think about programs like iReady, those are not nonprofit entities, those are for-profit entities. But you bring them into schools to provide services for public education. So I think there may be a couple of charter schools, I'm guessing, I don't know of any, but there may be some that may contract with a company to, let's say, do financial services. Or they may offer some sort of administrative services, yes. But in terms of having a principal, assistant principal, those kinds of positions, they're all there. Those are the people that are running the school. And then they all have to have a governing board, just like any other school system would have, who are responsible ultimately for what happens at that school. So it's a little bit of a misnomer. There's no private anything in terms of operating, running any public school in Georgia.
Are charter schools doing better in Georgia than traditional, what we would call traditional schools? And if so, what's your evidence?
That's a tough question, right? Because it depends on what kind of charter you're talking about. We have 5 different types of charter schools in Georgia. You've got the local startups, as I mentioned in APS. Atlanta Public Schools has, I think, 17 startup charter schools that they authorize themselves, right? By contract, they all have to outperform the entire district. But then Atlanta Public Schools itself is a charter district. So all the schools within Atlanta are charter schools.
Fulton County.
Fulton County, Putnam, the list goes, there are 38 districts in Georgia that are charter districts. Then you have conversion charters. So I live in Cobb. Walton High School is a conversion charter. And then you have your state charters. So those are the ones that are serving kids maybe who had to drop out and need a different type of program. And then you have the state charter commission schools. So it's hard to say with a blanket, are charters doing better than traditional? Because it depends on the district, it depends on what type of charter it is. What I like to think about is how can we make sure that all kids attending public schools are doing well?
How about special needs students in charter schools? How many, because some of our children can't even feed themselves or keep their heads up, etc. Could you name the charter schools in the state that actually just serve the population of special needs students?
All of them do. You can't not serve students with special needs.
Are there any charters right now where people have applied for just for special needs students?
I'm not aware of any charter schools that are specifically
Wait a minute, let me say, this is
for-
not to put her on the spot. We're trying to find it out too, because we're trying to do the same thing, serve everybody. Go ahead, Representative.
I'm not aware of a specific charter school that's set out to serve students with special needs. Just like there is not I'm not aware of a traditional public school that sets out just to serve students with special needs. All public schools, regardless of what their type, so if it's a magnet school, although they're the only ones who can pick and choose their students, traditional public, contract, virtual, no public schools in Georgia have the ability to pick and choose and say, we don't want that kid with a special need.
Now, you were a state representative. Your opposition was not a state representative.
That's correct.
And your opposition was a classroom teacher. Okay. Let's talk about legislation that deals with tax dollars for private schools. Does that type of legislation exist?
Say that question again.
Does the legislation exist where tax dollars are used for private schools?
Yes, we have one program called the Special Needs Voucher. That's SB 10. I think it was passed around 2012 or 13. I did not vote for that, but it is a program that's in our system. As I've talked to parents who have children with special needs, and I am one, they have found that program to be very successful. But that's the only program that we have in Georgia that tax dollars are going to private schools. And I want to say for the camera and for the record I did not vote for that bill.
Okay.
So there are people who, spread rumors and give misinformation. So I want to make very clear to you and to you, I have never voted for a voucher bill in Georgia.
All right.
Never made a speech, never wrote a paper, an article, nothing. But I will say I support parents having choices for their own children, whether it's public or private. I think parents need to be able to decide what's best for their children.
Yeah. As teachers, we have some opposition to the choices that are on television, the choices that are on the internet, the choices of music, the choices of food. So that word is something that we can discuss a little later.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, depending upon the county or residence that you live in, age can determine opting out of local school taxes, and often folk like me have been called old folk. So how do you feel? I want you to elaborate on whether or not, and I'm going to say it, old folk like me should be able to opt out of school taxes, local school taxes.
I have mixed feelings about that. And I think it's a local issue. And it's why in our state it is a local issue, and each county decides for themselves how they want to do that, what their rate is, what the age is, all of that. And the reason I say I have mixed feelings about it, I think all of us have a responsibility to contribute to educating the public. When my 3 children graduate from high school, we all want that diploma to mean something. And we want to know that we've invested in the greater good of educating those 3 children and the 1.7 million children in our state. And I think we all have a responsibility to do that. And as taxpayers, we want to invest in a system to make sure that it has the resources it needs to properly educate our students. At the same time, I understand that, I don't like the term old folks, older people have worked hard, they may be on a fixed income, and having a little bit of a tax break could be helpful. And so, I respect counties who have made that decision, who have been able to balance their budgets and continue to offer the services that they need without seniors paying, the full amount of property taxes. But I also strongly believe that everybody, all of us, have a responsibility to invest in our public education system.
All right, thank you. You are a single voter. Per Transparency in Schools, we often see the news depict violence in schools, usually in public schools. And it might be because private schools don't have to let them in or won't let them in, or I don't know.
And I don't know either, because all my work has been in public education.
As a voter and a parent, tell us 4 suggestions that you would have for alleviating school violence.
Love that question. So the first priority for me as prayerfully the next state school superintendent is school safety. And for me, that means, of course, physical safety, right? What I am reminded of every day when I wake up is the conversation that I had with my 15-year-old the day after the Uvalde shooting, when my husband and I were, like so many parents, afraid to send her to school because we weren't sure what was going to happen. And we let her go to school, and she came home on that May 25th and sat at the table and, how are you doing? Because I believe you have to talk to your children to see, how are you feeling? What are you thinking? And so, she said, well, it's on our minds and we're thinking about it, but we know nobody's going to do anything. And that really hurt me to hear my child say that she didn't think anybody was going to do anything to keep them safe. And so safety for me is critical as a mom, as a policymaker, as a former superintendent. I want to make sure that there's a larger presence of law enforcement, not in the sense that we are adding to this school to prison pipeline and we're making children afraid to go to school, but in the sense that we have officers who are there with an understanding that they are there to protect children and to prevent intruders from coming in. So there's got to be that physical safety. There's got to be conversation about buildings and multiple entrances so that intruders can't come in. But we also have to talk about mental health. We have to normalize mental health in our public education system with our students and with our educators. In so many of these instances, we are watching young people enter these buildings as intruders and take the lives of others because the issues that they were facing were never dealt with. And so I want us to focus very heavily on mental health and have strong relationships between law enforcement, mental health agencies, educators, parents, and young people. The final piece that I want to say when it comes to school safety, there's lots of fights and school violence and other issues that we need to deal with. And I feel like we have to be clear that we need to protect students, we need to protect teachers, we need safe environments. But we also have to think hard about what do we mean when we say school safety? It's not just the physical safety, there's some emotional safety there too. Do students feel safe when they come to school? Do they feel welcomed? The adults who are standing in front of them, are they creating an environment that makes them feel like they belong? I think when students feel safe emotionally, we can also address some of the other issues that are creating problems physically.
Thank you. Okay. Surveys are more prolific during the campaign season, election season, but the candidates have already, or the nominees, have already been chosen. There are still surveys, people are still calling, they're still knocking on doors, asking people. And as a good educator in preparing for a class or getting to know who my students are, those assessments are taken long before we get into those classrooms and get into the subject matter. I want you to elaborate on why do you think surveys are continuously happening even after the candidates on both sides are already chosen?
So are you talking during the primary on to the general?
Right now, going into the general.
I mean, things happen, right? And there are lots of people who are undecided. We did a survey for my campaign and found that my opponent had a 17% favorability across the state. And someone who's been in office for 8 years should have a much higher favorability than 17%. And so doing surveys helps you understand people's feelings, their thoughts, what are the issues that are most important to them. And one of the things that I was happy to learn when we conducted our survey is that people care most about school safety. They are concerned about teacher burnout. And they are concerned, and I think the most, is that our schools are moving in the wrong direction. And it's one of the reasons why I'm running for state school superintendent. We need to move our schools in the right direction. And we've had someone in office for 8 years who has contributed to teacher burnout, who has not done anything to address school safety, who is still delivering a telegram education to a TikTok generation. And if we don't move fast, we're going to be stuck for another 4 years in the woods.
Now, I'm interested in knowing what can we concretely do to address the burnout of teachers. And I need to go back to something because I was asking about retirement, and I should have also asked you, what could we do to retain teachers that we have, good teachers, attract the best teachers, and what do you consider a darn good best teacher?
So number 2 on my list, and let me just give you the 3 of the list so you'll know what they are.
Okay.
School safety, address teacher burnout, and reimagine public education. Those are the 3 platform issues for me. And then within there are several other things that need to be addressed, including the funding formula, the fact that in our rural areas, students still don't have access to broadband. There are a number of things that need to be addressed. But going to this teacher thing, which is probably the thing, other than school safety, that I'm so deeply passionate about. Teachers have been burned out for a long time, and I don't need to tell you that. I remember being in the legislature, it's been 8 years since I've been out, but 10 years ago, teacher burnout was an issue. I think it's gotten worse over the last 4 to 6 years, exacerbated over the last 2. My problem is nothing has been done about it. So here are the things that I do want to do about it. Number 1, I want to create the office of the teacher advocate. I want a full-time staff focused on the needs of teachers. What resources do you need? How do we gather grants and opportunities so that you no longer, not you, but teachers no longer, current classroom teachers no longer have to pay $700, $1,500 to, get their classrooms ready. What are the support systems that we need in place? How do we get funding to pay
go
off?
back to school to be certified paraprofessionals.
Oh, I'm going to talk about, yes.
All right, but anyway, go ahead. I am
Yes.
not advocating for any, y'all need to know that I'm not advocating for anybody. I'm just throwing
But it's
stuff out
okay
as an educator.
if she's
But
advocating
go
for
ahead.
me, it's okay. So y'all watch. So the Office of the Teacher Advocate, I really feel strongly about this. And when I say that teachers have not had a champion, I think, in the governor's office, in the state school superintendent's office, the legislature, I mean that. I saw it as a superintendent, I saw it as a state legislator, and I certainly see it now as a parent, as I talk to my kids' teachers. Secondly, I want to address a couple of things in terms of public policy. Number one, I want to institute mental health days that we pay for at the state level. So no more calling in, maybe saying something that might not exactly be true because you really just need a day off because you're worn out. You should be entitled to take a mental health day so that you can get yourself together. This is the toughest job, I think, one of the toughest jobs that anybody could have.
You can do that as state school superintendent, you think?
In working with the legislature, absolutely.
Okay. All right.
And that's why it's so important to have a former state representative as a state school superintendent, because I understand how the budget works. I've got the relationships in the legislature, and I've also been a superintendent. So I also understand the operations of schools and how those things need to be done. I also want to work with the legislature to enact a law that protects time for teachers to take off so that they can go to their own parent-teacher conferences. I want to provide more support for school leaders. We know that many times teachers are leaving because of the leadership in the building. So how do we create an environment so that school leaders have the resources and the tools that they need to create a climate in which teachers feel supported and respected?
Now, if you can't get that through the legislatures, are there any other agencies that you could go through, perhaps, that they could maybe implement it locally in those?
Absolutely.
Give us some examples.
One of the offices, and there are several offices that I want to create. One is Office of the Teacher Advocate. Another is Office of Equity. That's a whole other conversation. I don't know if you have any questions on equity, but that's something that's also deeply important to me as well. But I think within the Department of Education, what we've not seen, and I've been around this for more than 20 years, just like you, we've not seen a state school superintendent who does more than the two things that the Constitution says: to run the Department of Education and to serve as an ex officio of the State Board of Education. I want to be the kind of state school superintendent that really provides a vision for public education in Georgia, that helps to create this shared vision across all 181 school districts, where superintendents feel supported. They get guidance. As an example, and I know I'm answering 3 or 4 questions at one time, but all throughout COVID, as districts were dealing with arguably the most difficult time in public education, there was not one drop of leadership or guidance from this current state school superintendent. They all had to figure out on their own how they're going to navigate schools. Are we in school or are we out of school? How are we going to support teachers who may have been teaching for 15 years, but now they feel like a first year because they don't know how to navigate these tools that we're giving them to teach online, right? And so when you have someone as state school superintendent who is a leader, who is a visionary, districts can feel supported and know that somebody has their back, that someone has access to national resources who can help them think about best practices. Another example that I'll give, we talked about this news article that also gets me quite fired up. You know why I think why only 32% of our 4th graders are reading proficiently? Because all 181 school districts all have a different reading program. Some of them aren't even research-based. And so how can we expect our students to do well when we don't have a shared vision for reading? How can we expect teachers to have the resources and the skills that they need when the most expensive endorsement that you can get on your certificate is what? Literacy. Am I right?
let me ask you this, because I want to go back to what you think a great teacher is.
Okay.
But I would like for you to tell us, in your opinion, as it relates to the school districts, where does local control begin and end?
I think there's got to be a shared vision of what the purpose of public education is in Georgia, right? I think we got to do that together. I would argue that our current vision, where we lack a vision of what public education is in Georgia, and because of that, our public policy is out of whack. We don't talk, we don't work together, there's no collaboration, everybody's doing their own thing. I don't think that is what is meant by local control. I think where local control begins is where there's a shared vision, there's public policy, and there's funding that supports that shared vision. And then at the local level, you implement it in ways that best meet the needs of your community. As an example, if we're talking about school safety, when I was in Columbus, and I've been doing these conversations across the state around school safety, what I learned is that in Columbus, all of the schools at the high school have a school resource officer, but at the middle and elementary school, they do not level. Cobb County is the opposite. All the schools are pretty much covered. In the elementary school, they share those officers. Well, that's a decision that I think local school districts should be able to make, because they know the resources, they know the community, they know what they have and don't have, they know what works. And so local control means I can make decisions based on the schools that I serve and what they need. But the public policy needs to be all of our students must be kept safe. And you've got to have a solid plan that shows me at the Department of Education how you're going to keep all 1.7 million children safe.
Tell the public, do you think whether or not the CARES Act money was used responsibly with those schools as it relates to COVID and keeping people safe and keeping everybody alive as much as possible, and where local control began and end, you think? That's kind of foggy in my head. So
I'll tell you why it's foggy.
Okay.
Because nobody's tracking it. This superintendent is not tracking how CARES Act funds are being spent. And we will not know until 2024 when all the money is gone or the time has gone, because again, we don't have leadership at the Department of Education.
Now, DeKalb County got the most money, $500 million. And I was reading an article where Forsyth County, there are some educators there had some problems with the way that money was doled out. And I could see both sides of that. But some of that responsibility was with the local school districts also.
Most of it, and I'm not suggesting that there's not responsibility at the local level. Your question was, do I think it was spent well? And I'm saying the reason that we're all foggy on it is because the entity that is responsible for how state and federal funds are spent at the state level isn't tracking it.
And where local control begins and ends.
And where the local control piece begins is that each school district received funds and they have responsibility to disseminate those funds based on their local needs. But there's still a role for the state to track how those funds are used, but also to provide some guidance, because this is where the expertise is, right? At the Department of Education, you have, hopefully, well, when I'm the state superintendent, I will have access to the best thinking in the country, the best research, right? You're data driven. I know you know how important that is.
That's going to be my next question, but go ahead.
So it's about sharing resources with districts. It's about giving guidance. It's about saying, here are the best practices in school safety. Fulton County did an extraordinary job on using some of their funds on what? Literacy, right? And the science of reading. That was a good spend with those dollars. And every district did their own thing, and I think they should have that flexibility. I just believe that it should be tracked, and there should be more guidance from the Department of Education.
Okay. If you are elected, name the first 3 people, not family members, you think you should meet with, and the top 3 organizations, the first.
Ooh, that's a really good question.
Well, I narrowed it down to 2.
Okay.
And then tell us why.
This is a good question. No one's asked me this one yet. The first group that comes to mind would be the more than 70 faith leaders across the state who have endorsed me. And the reason that they would be one of the first groups I would meet with is, as I've asked for their support, I've also said to them, this is a contract. This isn't you just lending your name. This is a contract because you are agreeing to partner with the Department of Education, with the school districts in your community, and together we're going to find ways to connect with parents so that they can be empowered. They will know how to, the questions to ask when they go to that parent-teacher conference. They'll be able to advocate effectively for their children in an IEP meeting, and they will be a part of what I believe has to be a concerted effort to really get our state, our communities to better embrace, regard education and educators. I think we need a whole campaign to do that, because we've gotten away from the way we once respected and loved and honored educators and education. So that would be the first group that I would make sure that I connect with, because we have work to do.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just going to say this. I know when we defeated the Opportunity School District, we've really tried to do that with many ministers. And this has nothing to do with State Representative Searcy. But sorry, ministers, some of you have done a mammoth great job in that. And some ministers we didn't have any PAC money for, or any other type of funding. And it just fell flat. And a lot of this happened in my own community, and I was just so disappointed, because we know the power of those faith leaders.
I do. And since you mentioned Opportunity Scholarship, I think this would be a perfect time to point out, because again, there's been a lot of misinformation out there. I read an article that was written a few weeks ago that claimed that I voted for the Opportunity Scholarship. Opportunity
School District.
Yeah, or Opportunity School District. Have you heard that rumor?
I have not.
Yeah, I don't know where it came from, but that...
Tell me when it became law, after we defeated the amendment?
I guess. I don't know.
That's the Second Amendment.
I don't know any of the history of it, because I wasn't in the legislature. And so that was my point. Again, another thing I want to say to the cameras, the rumor has been that I voted for the Opportunity, what's it called?
School District.
Opportunity School District. That law was passed in 2015. I left the legislature in 2014. So that would have been impossible for me to vote for. So all of these, you know.
They may have it confused with that First Amendment.
The charter school amendment? Okay, that may be possible.
Might be it.
But those are two very separate things.
They are.
I am proud to have been a co-sponsor of the constitutional amendment that created the State Charter Commission. It passed overwhelmingly in almost every Democratic district across the state. Fulton, DeKalb, Chatham, the list goes on.
Why do you think the other one failed?
I don't know, because I was not involved at all in the conversations. I wasn't involved in the policy. I wasn't there. So I can't speak to why it passed or didn't pass. I can't speak to the clergy who were or were not a part of it. I just want to make clear for my record, because this election is too important for people to be stuck on things that are not true. And I'm very proud of the record that I have in public education. And I need people to understand what my record is so that you can make informed decisions and not be misled by people who may have other agendas or just don't operate from facts.
The first one, I think, dealt with the money. The second one dealt with governance amendments. And there was a candidate, I won't call that candidate's name or party, called not too long ago to let me know in another role that I have, that now there's $110 million, there's a bill for that, going to private schools out of tax dollars, as opposed to $100 million. And I had to ask that candidate, go do your homework and find out who opened that door. All right, but that leads to the last question.
All right.
And with the last candidate, I did like that, because this is the fun question.
Yay, I like fun.
Per campaign financing. Eliminated.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
Since this is the last question, because sometimes we just got to clear the record. If I had the support of the teachers union, whether it's AFT or GAE or anybody else, they probably would have been on that list of top 3. But you can't turn your back on somebody.
That reminds me, you didn't name the top 3.
Well, I gave you one because I had to,
What?
I told you
Okay.
the faith leaders.
Okay.
But you can't turn your back on somebody. When I was in the legislature, I had a 100% voting record on labor issues and teacher issues. You were there, you know. I'm not sure what happened between 2014 and the 8 years I was out of the legislature that all of a sudden teachers forgot the teachers' unions, because it's not rank and file teachers.
Yeah, now, I'm not here representing the teachers.
I know,
union.
I'm not talking to you as in your other
or
role.
labor, but I was on those screening committees and saw what happened with labor.
So
But
as you
since
said,
since you brought it up,
I'm
but we're
not
gonna
speaking
discuss
to
that
you on
camera.
those roles.
Okay.
I'm talking to the people because
Okay.
facts are very important.
They are.
And so I want people to understand who I am, how I operate, and this is my opportunity to do that. And so I want people to understand it was very disappointing to have a 100% voting record with teachers and with labor. And then when I run for state school superintendent, folks who lead those organizations have amnesia and forget that I have stood with them for 12 years.
Now, this is your second time running. Can you recall the reasons they didn't support you the first
I
time?
wouldn't know because
Okay.
I have not, gotten that information. And I can't speak to the first time. I'm talking about right now, now that I'm running in 2022. So the second piece of that is, and this is really important for me to say, I'm going to say it to you and I'm going to say it to the camera. What I want teachers to understand is that the organizations who represent you, who take your dues money, should also represent your values and what's important to you. So it was a slap in the face to me, and I think to educators and certainly those who are my friends who have pulled their dues and membership, for the organizations to support my opponent who has contributed to the burnout of teachers, who is pushing anti-CRT. He was the one. Before the legislature even passed the law, the Divisive Concepts Law, Richard Woods pushed the policy at the State Board of Education to ban books and to pass that Divisive Concepts policy. That's his only accomplishment in 8 years. He hadn't done anything about burnout. He studied it. He ain't done nothing about it. He hasn't done anything about teacher pay. He hasn't done anything about, except for give you $125 for your rooms. But then he gets the endorsement of one of the teachers groups. So I think rank and file teachers need to think really hard about whether or not their organizations are truly representing their values and are doing the right things with your hard-earned money. Why would you support the same person? Because and I'm not talking about the organization that you're involved in, but there's another organization.
I argue with my organization too, so I'm listening.
But there's one organization in particular that was on the news in the last 6 months, moaning and groaning about how teachers' hands are being tied behind their backs because of this divisive concepts bill, and they feel disrespected because they can't teach history and facts. But then you go and support the same person who passed the policy? It's a slap in the face. And so I want educators to know I am the candidate who's going to fight for you. I'm the one that's going to stand up for you. I did it for 12 years in the legislature. Nothing has changed. And so I want the teachers groups to be one of the first ones that I meet with. But I'm going to tell you, you can't turn your back on me and then expect you're going to be the first ones I'm going to meet with. But I can assure you that rank and file teachers will always have access to me, will always be able to call me, come to the office, email me. I will always be responsive because I don't play politics with teachers.
Half of the rank and file are not organized, period. So now you got some leeway there too. And that can be a pro and a con.
Understood. But I want to make that distinction between the leadership of the organization that I think made largely political decisions that are based on misinformation and some downright lies, and the hundreds of thousands of educators who are depending on them to be their advocate. That's what I struggle with, because they were not in my 1 hour and 45-minute interview where no questions were asked about teacher salary, no questions were asked about burnout or school safety. I answered many questions about charter schools.
Now, there are 3 known state organizations, and there are about 7 or 8 organizations in Atlanta. Georgia Association of Educators, Georgia Federation of Teachers, Professional Association of Georgia Educators. Those are the 3 I know statewide. I know Georgia Federation of Teachers set all of it out. GAE endorsed the other person. Do you know what Page did?
They don't endorse candidates.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's get the count.
If you do the math, I'm talking about 2 groups. And again, I have to make this distinction because I support and stand with teachers. I always have and I always will.
But Page has a big voice down, and this is not Page at all. It does have a big voice at the state capitol, and some people I know, some leaders in the organization said, set it out because it doesn't do us any good to do anything, especially when we have organizations that don't elect folk that can go down at that state capitol and have their way.
Well, I wish that GFT and AFT would have stood with me as I have stood with them for the last 12 years I was in the legislature. And there's still time.
Well, now I have to speak in another role, so that I can't do it right here.
Okay. There's still time, so
Because
tell
there are
everybody
times
that
that
needs
you
to
did
know.
not stick with us, but
Name one.
Well, the first one is when you lobbied for that amendment that right now opens the door for finance for all types of schools in Georgia that was not evidence-based, that just opened up a whole new cadre of business. That's why we were asking about the charter schools. But
you can't just say that, drop it, and then keep going because nothing
Alisha,
that you said is factual.
All right. All right, so tell us, who are your...
Facts are important.
Tell us where...
And if you can't back it up, then you probably shouldn't say it. Go on.
Okay. All right. All the financial reporting is not in yet. Some will come in after the election. And Joe Blow voter needs to know where to find out who contributed to your campaign or who has been contributing to your campaign. So first tell us where would they find that out, and then tell us your top 3 major contributors outside of individual donors.
Ooh, okay. So I don't remember the name of the agency because it's changed since I was in the legislature, but you can certainly Google, I think it's the Ethics Commission. That information is available right now, and 90% of what we receive will be reported. We just had a report due on October 25th. So unless somebody's getting a huge influx of cash, you're going to know, and it's public information. That's all a part of the Transparency Act, so there's nobody hiding anything. I will say that I am proud that I have outraised my opponent. I outraised him in the primary as well as in the general, and continue to do that. The vast majority of my funds come from individuals in the state of Georgia.
Outside of that, outside of the individuals, are there any special interest groups that are contributing to your campaign?
I have just got a contribution from an organization called Equity in Education that's based here in Atlanta. So they're
one of your top ones, you think?
They're one of my top. I'm trying to think organizations.
Sometimes it's hard because the most candidates can't just think like that in terms of
because
there are so many sources.
And for me, as I said, the vast majority, I don't have a lot of max out checks. I don't have a lot of big checks. So the reason I can't name them is because I don't have a lot. Most of my larger checks came from individuals and a lot of smaller checks. I think, and there's one other organization called, it's a PAC, an education PAC. So there are 2 education PACs that are my biggest donors that have
Do you know the names of them?
I just named one, Equity in Education.
Okay.
And the other one I have to get the name of, I don't remember. It's something about quality public education.
Okay. All right.
Where are you getting at with that question? What are you trying to find out?
I'm trying to find out who's, money is behind everything. So we're just trying to find out who's contributing to you, that's all.
Yeah. I will say what's interesting is that for my opponent, his biggest donor of $9,000 is GAE.
He did say that, I think.
Yeah,
I don't supposed to be telling the answers, but she's going to see it anyway. But anyway.
So if that's a special interest, I wonder if that's a concern for people. I don't know. I don't get caught up in all of that. I think...
but the public, you would think, need to know.
Sure, and that's why it's public information. No one's hiding that. It's all public information, and people should certainly Google that. But I think what's most important in that question for me is We all have to participate in this process.
That's right. If we know where to find the information, that's part of education.
It's
so
easy
many
to
people
find.
don't know. It might be if you know where to look. And that's part of
All
why
you have
we
to do
Let's
is
Talk.
Google the candidate and campaign disclosure reports. It's very easy.
Thank you.
Nobody's hiding it, I promise.
Did I ask in the beginning what distinguishes
Where was
you?
the fun question? I thought there was a fun
I
question.
thought that was fun. Did I ask you in the beginning who?
We got to
what
talk if that's what you think is fun, Ms. Turner. Whew. Okay.
What distinguishes you from your opposition? Did I ask that in the beginning?
Not yet.
All right. So what I'm going to do, I am going to step off the set. And I would like for Representative Searcy to tell us what distinguishes her from her opposition and for her to wrap it up for us. And Representative, I want to thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing. It's been an honor.
Thank you.
And thank you, Georgia.
Thank you for having me today. This conversation was very important to me for a number of reasons. I am running for state school superintendent because there are 1.7 million children who deserve to have a state school superintendent who will do something. Do something about school safety, do something about the fact that for too long they've been getting this telegram education to a TikTok generation. I'm also running for state school superintendent because for too long teachers and educators have not had a champion. This interview was also important because this election is too critical for people to get caught up in lies and misinformation and things that are being stated without facts or without any basis. And all we have at the end of the day are our reputations and our records. If our records and our reputation and our past history is an indicator of the future, here's what I can tell you about my history. I got our school's CCRPI score from a 43 to an 85, 65 to an 81, teacher retention rate from 25% to 75%. What you can expect if you elect me state school superintendent is the same kind of results for students and for educators. What you can expect is when I was in the state legislature and had a 100% voting record for working families and labor, 100% voting record for teachers, that I'll continue to stand up for you. Why elect someone who's not done anything for the last 8 years? If you are a parent like me, if you are an educator like me, you know we don't have another 4 years. I don't have another 5 minutes. And so when you go to the polls today or all through November 8th, I want you to think about what's most important in this election. Rumors and misinformation, or voting for the person who's going to stand up for you, who has a vision, who can talk not just about what they want to do as if they've not been in office for 8 years, or have a vision to talk about what they will do based on what they've also done in the past, but based on the future and what is possible. I know that in Georgia we can reimagine public education. I know that in Georgia we can attract and retain great teachers. I know that we can have a state school superintendent who will provide guidance and support for school districts and provide vision and leadership for all 181 school districts, for all 1.7 million students. I need a state school superintendent who believes that parents should be equal partners in public education. We need a state school superintendent who will wake up every single day thinking not just about the 3 children in my house, but all of the children in every corner of the state of Georgia. And so I ask for your vote now through November 8th because we have an opportunity to do something different, to do something about school safety, do something about teacher retention, to do something about teacher burnout, and to do something so that we'll stop delivering this telegram education to a TikTok generation. I'm excited, I'm hopeful, I'm looking forward to making history and doing great things to improve public education in Georgia. I look forward to seeing you on November 9th so we can get to work.